Hi, and welcome to International IDEA's first Facebook Live event. My name is Lisa Hagman, and I work in the communications team at IDEA. We're very excited to try this new technology, and we invite questions from you, the audience. Please put any questions you have on the topic of today, which is technology and elections, in the comments field under our Facebook stream. With me here today is Peter Wolf. He's the technical manager in our electoral processes and constitution building team. And you're a real expert on IT and elections. Thank you for coming, Peter.
Thank you.
Could you start by explaining a little bit about what you do at IDEA and what IDEA does on this topic?
Of course. So my area of work is exactly what this session is about, elections and technology, now also gradually expanding into democracy and elections. What is quite interesting here for us at IDEA is sustainability of technology, also transparency and trust of the technologies used in elections. Both angles actually making technology trusted, making also technology transparent, but also using technology in a way that makes elections more transparent and more trustworthy. So what we're doing here at IDEA is we're at the global level producing publications, guides, handbooks, databases as well, and we also do a lot of work in the regions, in the countries, in cooperation with our offices there, where we do all kinds of work, including organization of roundtables, bringing stakeholders together, letting them discuss issues around the technology, also advising, assisting election commissions directly, and organizing conferences and workshops around those topics. And again, as I said before, the focus mostly at the moment is elections and technology, but we are gradually now looking to expand this into also democracy and technology issues. Of course, there's many ways of how new technologies have an impact on technologies as well, and that's what we are going to explore in the future as well.
Okay, that sounds very interesting. Technology has changed most of our lives today in very many ways. But when I go to vote, and I have been voting for 30 years in Sweden, it's pretty much the same process, at least what I see. Could you sort of explain a little bit? I understand there's technology used in other countries maybe, or technology that I as a voter don't see.
Yeah, well, I mean, here in Sweden, you're not alone with this. In many Western democracies, in many well-established democracies, you'll have a similar experience. You still go to a polling station, you still find a pencil and paper, and you vote the old traditional ways that have been there for 100 years or so. Of course, there are exceptions. Everybody knows about the United States, the voting machines there, internet voting in Estonia maybe, but by and large, in many countries, everybody's still voting on pen and paper. But of course, that doesn't mean that there's not technologies involved in those countries as well. So you have a lot of systems that are used in the background to support the process. Can be anything from registering the parties at the beginning of the process, voter registration, creating the voters list that are being used, even if they're in paper in polling stations, they still have to be produced somehow. The entire result processing that is required from polling station results, aggregation, publishing of the results. So there's a lot of kind of invisible technologies involved that voters don't see in the first instance. But of course, when it comes to the really visible technologies, which is often voting machines, biometric systems that are really on the forefront of attention in the process, you see actually that developing democracies are using them much more than maybe Sweden. So you'll have, for example, biometric registration systems being used widely across Africa or also Latin America these days. And also some of the voting machine experiences are coming from countries like Brazil, India, the Philippines, recently and also Namibia. So it's mostly those countries that are venturing first with those technologies.
Okay, very interesting. So if maybe the more established democracies are more reluctant to get onto the train. But what are the reasons for introducing technology in elections if it's already working?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the main reason. So ideally, the reason for introducing technology is always to increase the integrity of the elections, to improve whatever might be going wrong. If elections results are too slow, to use technology to speed this up. If there's a problem with accuracy, if there's maybe concerns about manipulation, to try to make election results more accurate, to curb this manipulation. And so many countries in established democracies don't see this as a particular challenge, and so they also don't see a big reason to switch a lot to some of those new technologies. While in developing democracies, often those issues are much bigger, and so they are more inclined then also to invest in those technologies. Mm-hmm. Of course, those are kind of the ideal reasons for introducing tech, but there is others as well. Sometimes there is an expectation maybe that technology will reduce the cost of elections, which is a bit difficult, especially if you want to deploy polling stations to all polling stations, technology to all polling stations. I mean, this can
it actually increase the cost of elections?
Exactly. So that can become quite costly. At the moment, there's a few studies going on, so the jury is still out, but there are a few indications that especially field-deployed technology is actually quite costly and might be more expensive than traditional pen and paper voting. But of course, other technologies can still help to decrease costs. Sometimes there is also almost vanity issues for introducing technology. Some countries see, well, our neighboring country has something, why don't we have that? Are we maybe falling behind and have more this incentive to look modern, to look progressive, and that's why they want to introduce this. And then also quite worrying, sometimes there is a bit of an assumption that technology is a panacea, so that it will just resolve everything by just throwing technology out at the problem. So if we just introduce some sort of technology, the elections are going to get better, which of course is not necessarily guaranteed.
No. There is of course hesitation and in some cases probably even resistance against introducing new technologies. And there might be a reason for the concern. What do you think about sort of the recent stories you hear in the news about hacking in different countries and sort of what are the security implications?
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, there are quite a lot of reasons why some stakeholders are worried about the introduction of technology. Of course, in the end, elections are a political contest, and immediately if something changes, some might fear that they're losing out, others might fear or might think they're winning. So of course the ones that fear losing out might oppose any kind of change, including also the introduction of technology. Costs I mentioned before already, sometimes there's a worry that it's going to be too expensive and that this is maybe not where a country should invest its resources first. But then of course security of technology is becoming more and more of a concern as well. It's not really a new concern. So when you look at the communities of ICT experts, computer security experts, there was always a worry that we might entrust too much of the core of our elections, when it comes to the voting and the vote counting process, into technologies that are maybe not tested well enough and that are maybe not secure enough. And so now this is only coming to the forefront with all of those hacking stories that we've seen starting last year. All of a sudden this is becoming a very prominent topic, which it can be, of course, difficult for maintaining trust in elections, but it's also a good thing. It raises an important issue. People become aware of it, also countries become aware. There is, in many cases, definitely a need to look at this closer, how secure and how trustworthy is the technology really we are using. Often there is also investment required. We maybe have not spent enough on making sure that those technologies are really trustworthy. So overall, one could also see a big opportunity in those challenges of those recent hacking allegations.
Is there a problem? I'm just thinking elections happen on a regular basis, but there's quite a time span in between. Is it difficult to test the technology in between? And sort of you can't really do a full-scale test and run a test election. So I guess that's also a bit fragile. How do you ensure that you have the technology or sort of that the security measures are there?
Yeah. No, of course, in general, that is a big concern that few other technologies are seeing. I mean, any other system that is normally, it's tested, it's deployed, and then it's just used on an ongoing basis for years and years until
you
it's
can
replaced.
Improve it while
something new comes in, and even if something goes wrong, you just delay and you maybe fix something and have this technology only running a month later when it's working. With elections, of course, that's very different. Technology has to be, especially voting technologies in polling station, it has to be deployed on election day. It has to work on election day. There's no way that things can be postponed. There's just one go. And there's also a limited amount of testing that can be done. Of course, things can be tested, but the massive scale on which this technology is used is only that one day, and there it has to be perfect. So that makes it more challenging than other technology. And
then, I mean, we were talking back and forth, but do you think technology actually improves elections?
It has a huge potential to improve it. I mentioned before some of the reasons why it is introduced, and of course, if those are realized, that there is a good chance that elections are really going to be better. But it always depends on the environment as well. If the environment is very fragile, if there's a lot of distrust in a country, maybe all of the improvements that technology can bring are not even enough for really making the elections better.
But I guess, I mean, you see countries where people really accept having a lot of technology in the elections. I'm thinking Estonia, because they actually have internet voting, which is really taking it a step further than most countries. So it's a bit of how you grow the trust, and when people started to accept the technology, you can actually build on that, I assume.
Absolutely. I mean, Estonia is a good case. The country in general sees itself as a very modern country, a kind of pioneer in all sorts of technologies, and voting technology is just one of them, and the population has a very positive attitude, and of course that helps the election management body as well to create trust in those systems. Also in other countries where there's a lot of issues with irregularities, with manipulation maybe in the voting process, people will just tend to trust technologies a lot more that promise to curb some of those. So it's not necessary that there's an inherent distrust. It's just one of the elements. There's always positive and negative opinions about those technologies.
I'm just checking if we have any questions through the Facebook Live. So if anyone is watching, I can just encourage you. We're getting towards the end of our prepared questions. But what about the future? When will countries run fully automated elections? And we accept a lot of technology in our world. I mean, a lot of banking is now done on the internet, and we fully trust it. Why are elections lagging behind, and what do you see sort of in the future?
Yeah, well, especially when it comes to online voting, it's maybe 10 years already ago that people thought, well, there is no way that 10 years from now, which means today, we would not vote online, and then there was an expectation a while back that there would be a lot more online voting by this time already. But it turned out it's not as easy as one would think to make online voting really working the way we would like to see it. Being systems that are really verifiable, so I know that the votes are really counted as expected, that they're also protecting the secrecy of my vote, but also that they can still be understood by average voters as well as everybody else in the electoral environment, from the EMB to courts to observers. So there have been a lot of challenges that have emerged over the last few years, and it seems like we're still gonna have to wait a while, 10 years, possibly more, until we can really expect a widespread use of online voting technologies. But of course, we'll probably see more and more countries maybe trying for a subset of voters, maybe only for voters abroad, and by this gradual, I guess, experiences are going to be made. For a completely automized and technologized election, maybe, because again, it's always a question of need. Is there really a need in every country to have all sorts of technology? I would doubt that. So I think it's more going to be that countries are going to pick and choose what is suitable in their context, what they really need, what really makes a difference, and that's what they're going to implement in the long term.
Yeah. Sorry, you were talking about an EMB. That's an electoral management body. I guess that's sort of the
our lingo. Unfortunately, everybody talks in acronyms, so
so that's the authority in the country that is responsible for organizing the election.
Election commission.
Yeah.
Election
commission. They call different things in different countries. Yeah. Okay. Question: election observation. Most elections today are observed either by domestic observers or international, or a combination of both. And if an election is then automized or run in computer world, how can you observe an election? What does it mean for the field of election observation?
Yeah, so that's not easy actually. So of course, going to a polling station, just watching a machine as it sits there will tell you maybe a little bit, of course, what impact it has on election day, how it influences the proceedings in the polling stations, but by far it will not tell you everything about this technology. So what you really have to look at as an observer is really the long-term perspective of this. You really have to follow all the way from the motivation of why were those technology introduced, how were they introduced, how were they procured, what kind of security measures are there, certification of technology, all of those measures that are being put in place, and of course that's...
So that's really a different kind of observation compared to what's done today, where you go into the polling stations and look at the actual process.
Exactly. So it's just requires a completely different approach, and this is maybe just one of the examples that also highlight how all the stakeholders in the electoral process have to adjust to technology. So it's not only that the election management body has to get adjusted and be able to run those technologies, or that the voters will have to know how to use it, but everybody else as well. Observers, courts, all the stakeholders, political parties have to understand what the technology does and also how to deal with it.
Okay. We've just got a question, which I lost. Modern technology, not always working. We have more than one question. Hold on. Maybe my colleague can help me. I think one was about how do you think technology will affect the citizen?
Do you think technology might have a direct impact on the way citizens perceive the overall electoral process?
How they perceive it. Obviously it does. Of course, it's always a question, of course, how it's communicated as well. Especially the very visible technology can become part of the campaign, become part of the debate as well. And of course, that will have an influence on the perception as well. Also, we briefly spoke about all of those hacking allegations in the past. I think that's an important example as well of how the perception can change. Because one thing actually that's important to realize with those hacking attacks is that there's usually two things that they try to achieve. It's maybe not necessarily that they want to actually really do this manipulation that they're claiming to do, but there's also an attempt to undermine trust and credibility of elections. And of course, just by claiming that there is a hack, by claiming that the technology is weak, this can be one of the avenues of just undermining trust in elections as a whole. And so that can be one of the perception issues. But again, the other way around is possible as well. People are very positively when they see old ways of irregularities are maybe addressed by technology. So obviously for them, then they will see a positive.
So it's hard to predict what will actually happen.
Yeah, it can go both ways.
I have another question, because now I got the technology to work, where there's a few online delegative democracy platforms. Democracy Earth, German Pirate Party, who had, and they look more at the legislative way of the process rather than just elections. But what do you see the challenges or opportunities facing these? Do you think that's something that's relevant even for the elections field?
Yeah, I guess, eventually, those are, of course, still mostly experimental systems, things that are growing, but of course, those kind of systems provide a lot of new avenues for more participation, for allowing citizens to participate in politics and in decision making in much more direct and creative ways. Participatory budgeting, for example, is another example. So, of course, technology has this potential, especially online technology, has this potential of shortening the link between parties, between their government as well and citizens, and can allow for many more much more participation than just representative democracy and the maybe traditional elections we were thinking about.
Yeah, I think this links, because the next question is about sort of the trends of informal political participation through social media from youth and other traditionally excluded groups, because we at IDEA we often see that youth is excluded from the political process. This participation in some cases shape the decisions that are taken through traditional electoral processes. But participation is not necessarily taken into account when doing the formal electoral process. How can technology help formalize these pool of citizens, include them, and really sort of make sure that they're not excluded despite their active participation through non-traditional means such as social media? Sort of, could it?
Yeah, there is of course a big risk there. Many people who participate in that way, participated maybe just on Facebook. This is not enough. People still have to go out to vote in official elections as well. And there is a risk that people think, well, I've done my duty just by being very active in online debates, but of course those votes in the end don't count. And one of the challenges with those opinions that are raised on social media is also that it's sometimes very hard to distinguish what is real, what is maybe just made up. We've all heard about the fake news. There is actually an interesting term out there called astroturfing, so basically simulating of grassroots movements online. So you could be part of a genuine grassroots movement that expresses their wishes and their concerns on social media, but there's others out there that are just simulating this, that are just putting robots, automatic systems out there that are simulating other causes. And so of course it's an important part of our political space and an important platforms for having a dialogue, but we shouldn't only rely on this. So of course it's going to be important that people still participate in elections, and some of the social media platforms are also helping a lot. There's Facebook, for example, they are also putting up messages, calling people to participate on election days. So I guess they play an important role also for channeling people and their users back into the polling stations.
And I understand both Facebook and Twitter are in the process where they will make sort of political information more transparent to show that it is political information. Which is probably a good sign. Yeah.
Obviously, I mean, they play a very important role. I mean, they're at least as important as other media outlets now, and to have some sort of oversight and control of what's going on in social media is going to be.
Yeah. We have a question here about Kenya, and if you have any insights where technology in Kenya, where technology is manipulated to influence results forms used in the transmission of poll results.
Yeah, Kenya is a very interesting case. I think it's very tricky. Obviously, it's always difficult to get technology right, to get it secure and so on. But one thing that Kenya showed for me as well is that sometimes it's difficult for stakeholders to really find out, that there's a lot of allegations, there's maybe proof, how good is this proof, what does it really show, how much manipulation has actually happened, and there is. So one of the lessons learned from me from Kenya would be actually there is more expertise needed in all the people looking at the evidence that's being brought forward. It's sometimes very easy with technology to just make claims because there's very few people out there who understand it. And it reminds me a little bit also of the old stories of voter registration. I mean, in the past, even in paper-based elections, voter registration was always the target for anybody who wanted to complain. You could always say, well, voter registration, that's always a few problems you find on the voter register. And similar, it can also happen with technology. Of course, there can be real concerns, there can be real hacking, but it's also very easy to just point at technology and say, well, see, something went wrong here. And then judging, how much was really manipulation going on, how much was it maybe just, systems that did work less than perfect, and how much was it just artificial complaints maybe that were created is really hard to judge.
And that goes back to that election observation will change, and you need a different kind of knowledge in order to do the observation, because it's more of a technical.
Exactly. So also Kenya, a good example there. I mean, everybody is challenged there. Of course, observers will have to make statements about what was going on. Was it manipulation? Was it not? And the same about court. So everybody really needs to be well prepared and have made their homework about the exact system that was there, and also about the kind of evidence that is being put out there.
Yeah. I have one more question, and this is more of a technical question. It's what kind of e-ballot should countries look for? Is VVPAT, which I think you should explain, enough to ensure clear elections? And how do you see a new model created in Argentina?
Yeah, so VVPAT, so those are the paper audit trails, so those are the receipts.
That means that the secrecy of how you voted is kept, or that you can audit and see.
So it's basically a possibility to audit machines. So again, those are paper receipts that are printed by voting machines in polling stations. So basically you vote on a machine, you press vote, but then of course in the first instance, how does anybody know that this machine really recorded the vote the way it should be recorded? And so VVPAT paper trails are one of the possibilities, and a very common possibility by now to do this. So basically after you vote, you get a printout, it says you voted for party X, you throw this printout in a ballot box, and after the election, this ballot box, those receipts can be recounted, and then you can actually control whether the machine voted exactly as
you wanted it.
Yeah, exactly, and then it reflects what is on those paper ballots. Of course, that's a very obvious way of checking those machines, and so it's one of those ways of making technology transparent. Everybody understands, well, if people have checked their receipts and if the recount is correct, then the machine would have been trustworthy as well. Of course, there's challenges with this as well. Studies have been conducted that show that people often don't even check those paper receipts. So, if the machine was really cheating and, every now and then made a mistake, it might even pass through. But it's by now considered pretty much of a standard measures, and most countries are now demanding those paper audit trails.
I understand also a few years ago you wrote a paper sort of what you should consider when introducing e-voting, which is really a lot of advice for countries looking into the matter and what they should look for, because it's not only the technology, is how you get there, isn't it? It's really about the process, and at IDEA we focus a lot on the processes.
Exactly, and there we advocate a lot for a very inclusive process, really making sure that everybody agrees, or a broad part at least of the political spectrum agrees that electronic voting in this case is a step forward. Also that everybody knows why certain solutions have been chosen and not, that everybody had a say in how trustworthy or not those systems are, what needs to be done to make them trustworthy, and that this is not just a maybe top-down decision that's taken somewhere and a system that's just imposed on the electorate, which often creates a lot of opposition amongst contestants and amongst political parties, and also creates distrust amongst voters. So to have a very inclusive process, not introducing those systems overnight, but really starting with a careful debate. Okay, what kind of problems do we solve? Is that the right technology to solve? What models are we choosing? How are we getting there? And then gradually introduce it. So those are some of the recommendations that are included in this book.
We have another question. Is there any risk that increased use of technology in election decreases voter turnout because popular mistrust? Have you seen anything like this? Because I know IDEA keeps a database both on ICT used in elections and on voter turnout. Have you done any comparison?
Yeah. Well, there is sometimes the desire or the wish is actually an opposite one. If we just use more technology, people will come and vote more, but it doesn't really seem to have a big impact on technology so far. So by and large, I mean, people will not go to vote just because a machine is there. So this old argument maybe that the youth is going to be so excited because a machine is in polling stations and that's why everybody turns out. Not really the case. So overall turnout by and large stays the same. But again, if the trust increases, if people really see, well, some of the concerns that they had with the process in the past, they will certainly be more encouraged to participate in elections. But there's no immediate link that you can say, well, if we just bring in a machine or online voting in the next election, turnout is going to jump by 10% or something like this.
No, so you can't really see a clear link.
So neither improving nor actually a decline because people say, well, we don't vote on this.
No. Okay, that's very interesting. I can't see any more questions in the comment section. We're getting towards the end of the questions or what we prepared. I would like to thank everyone for watching. This is really a learning experience, and if you have any feedback for us, how we can improve, if this was a good thing, please let us know also in the comment section. If you have any topics that you think we should do next time, let us know. We'll see if we have the expertise in-house that we can use. The publications we have are available on International IDEA's website. You can download them for free. The databases we were talking about also live on the website, and all data is available. So please use them and let us know if you think they're useful.
And send us your questions. Also, after this, we're always happy to answer any questions or any concerns you may have.
Yeah, thank you.